And we welcome you to the latest edition of Dolphins in Depth from the Miami Herald. Barry Jackson, along with Isaiah Smalls. Omar Kelly is cavorting around Seattle, preparing for Sunday's game. He's wandering the streets, hopefully not aimlessly, so he's not with us today. Omar will be back early next week. And Isaiah, what a test this will be for young Skylar Thompson in his first start. And the good news for the Dolphins with regard to Skylar having to fill in for the next few weeks is it's a soft part of the schedule. This is a winnable stretch with games at Seattle on Sunday, then the Monday night game against the Tennessee team that doesn't look particularly good, and then road games at Indy and at New England separated by the bye. We all saw Jacoby Brissett last night. New England looks tepid. Indy is very vulnerable. They just lost to Green Bay playing a backup quarterback as Richardson, their young quarterback, struggles. So the question is, what is realistic to expect the Dolphins to emerge with out of this 4-game stretch? Is 2 wins too much to expect? Is 3 wins too much to expect? Tell me what you think is realistic, Isaiah, and what keeps them relevant heading into Tua's potential return, hopefully late October against Arizona or soon after.
So for me, 2 games. That has to be the bare minimum, honestly. Because you mentioned who he's matched up against, right? The Tennessee Titans look dreadful. I watched them against the Jets last week. They look terrible. You know, obviously New England last night, like Jacoby Brissett couldn't really get it done. And they said that they have no plans of making any changes at the quarterback position. So those 2 wins, when I look at this schedule, I'm like, okay, these are wins that you got to pull off, right? Those are 2 that you kind of got to pull off. As far as the Seattle game, that's the one that's going to be, of course, it's the one that's first, right? That's the one that to me is a bit of a head scratcher just because of the quarterback battle. Like Geno Smith is obviously a veteran. He has great receivers on the outside in DK, JSN, and Tyler Lockett. And then, obviously I think, I don't think Kenneth Walker III is playing. I saw that he's doubtful.
Correct.
But still, between the weapons that they have on the outside, I think that's, if it comes down to an offensive shootout, I just don't think that they can compare the Dolphins with Skylar Thompson, under center. But I think what we've heard all week, and obviously Barry, you've been doing this a lot longer than me, so I wanted to ask you this question, right? Obviously, the big thing that I hear all week from all the players is that how much faith they have in Skylar. How much of that is just lip service, and how much of that do you think is we actually believe this guy can go out and win us, the bare minimum 2 games?
Yeah, I think he has respect to guys in the locker room. He's fearless, as Tyreek Hill said yesterday. He's up. They know he puts in the time. Durham Smythe said his arm would rank among the better quarterbacks in the league. So he has the physical skills. The question is the processing. Can he process quickly enough if his first read is not there? Accuracy is the other issue with him. 57% career accuracy. Everyone remembers the playoff game against Buffalo, and he was a gamer in that game, and he had some good moments, but the final numbers, 18 for 45, were not good. Now, Waddle dropped a couple passes in that game. He kept them in it. There was a defensive touchdown. They lost 34-31 in Buffalo in that playoff game. Skylar's last NFL meaningful start in a regular season or a playoff game. So he has the attributes that McDaniel and Greer have been worth investing in. He outplayed Mike White last year too, but they couldn't cut White after giving him that money. So now is his opportunity to prove that he's not only a legitimate NFL backup, but also that he's an NFL quarterback. I don't know that we have enough body of work to know if he's a long-term NFL number 2, but we're going to find that out over these next couple of games. He comes in with a relatively healthy supporting cast. Raheem Mostert is very likely to miss the game on Sunday. He has a chest injury. Mostert was telling us today it's an unusual injury, happened on the second carry of the Jacksonville game. He was falling on his shoulder, then a linebacker fell on him. He said it's an injury that resulted in what he called fractured cartilage, and he said it's going to take time. He's hoping to be ready for the Tennessee game, but no guarantees. He was limited this week. And then the other injury issue, Isaiah, is at receiver, where they are down to 3 healthy receivers on the 53, which is an incredibly low number. Fortunately, 2 of those receivers are Tyreek and Jalen Waddle, Braxton Berrios III. Grant Dubose has a shoulder injury. For those inquiring about how he got it, that was not clarified to us this week, and you're not permitted to speak with injured players, so we could not ask Grant Dubose. He was wearing a sling today. McDaniel said it's not season ending, but it's going to keep him out some time. And then Malik Washington, spoke to him today. He's still dealing with a quad injury. His workload increased this week. He was limited every day, but the trainer doesn't think he's ready quite yet. He's going to get a little extra time. So that means we're going to see Ezukama or D. Eskridge, the former Seattle player, probably elevated at receiver. I want to talk about the Dolphins and when they have the ball Sunday, but before we move on from injuries, just wanted to inform our audience about the Seahawks injuries. There are several meaningful ones. You mentioned Kenneth Walker, the very good running back. He's doubtful with an oblique injury. Walker hasn't even practiced and suffering the injury in week 1, so we're likely not going to see him. Zach Charbonnet will probably get a lot of carries for Seattle. Jerome Baker, a very popular Dolphin during his time here, he's doubtful with a hamstring. One of their starting tackles, George Fant, is doubtful with a knee. Another starting linebacker, Shenny Nwosu, is out with a knee, so looks like Seattle's going to be without at least one starting linebacker, Nwosu, very likely another one in Jerome Baker, who had started the first 2 games. And then several others are questionable. Safety, Kevon Wallace, tight end, Pharaoh Brown, linebacker, Boy Mafe, receiver, Levi Chanel, the former Jacksonville Jaguar. So these are significant injuries for Seattle. It's going to affect Seattle's defense. And I want to start, Isaiah, talking about when the Dolphins have the ball. Seattle's run defense has been vulnerable. They're 21st in the league. The Dolphins' run offense has been good for the most part. Achane with 96 yards last week. But here's the question. When teams play 2 high safeties against them, which has been the story of the week, even though the Dolphins' running game has had some good moments, even though Achane's looked terrific last week and for most of his young career, can they pound the ball, assert their will, pound the ball, run up the middle and also the outside zone read game successfully enough to make teams think twice about playing a light box against them? Because at some point, you have to force a team to play more at the line of scrimmage, 7 or 8 players, which would result in more single coverage and waddle and open up opportunities downfield. Do the Dolphins have that in them, Isaiah?
If they have that in them, we haven't seen it yet, but I think last week was a good indication of that, right? You know, I think Achane had 19 carries, right? 19, I believe.
22 carries for 96 yards, and he caught the ball 7 times as well.
Yeah, so anytime you're pushing over the 20 carry mark, to me that qualifies as a workhorse running back, right? And obviously that was like the first time that we've seen that out of Achane, right? And he looked phenomenal in that role, right? And so I think you kind of got to ride the hot hand. For me, the biggest key when the Dolphins have the ball is I'm looking obviously at Skylar, right? I want to see how he's processing everything. But outside of that, I think they have to make it a little bit easier than them. I don't really believe what they're saying, like, oh, no, it's basically the same. We're going to do blah, blah, blah. That's just, you can't, there's no way that you can have the same offense. You can have the same parts of it, but like the same exact offenses to it, that's just not, I don't believe that. Like that to me seems like lip service, right? And so I think you got to get, you got to get your playmakers open. I've been saying this all week. I did a few radio spots in Seattle, and I think for me it ultimately comes down to how they distribute the ball. I think he has to be like a good point guard. He has to, hopefully he's been watching hella John Stockton tape, because all he has to do is just get the ball to his great playmakers. And hopefully the scheme and the plays that are called does that, right? I'm thinking, obviously they're a big fan of the screen game, right? But then outside of that, slants, get Tyreek going across the middle on a drag, like very short right routes at first to allow him to get comfortable, to allow him to start, feeling the game, right? And then you expand the playbook from there. Obviously, the first 25 plays are scripted, and hopefully there's not going to be too many deep shots in that first 25 plays, because I don't think, that'll be good for Skylar's confidence at the time.
Yeah,
and so
I agree with most things you say. I would like to see some deep shots, because even though we have no conviction about whether Skylar's going to complete them despite his strong arm, I would like to at least make Seattle think that you're going to attempt those throws. Now, the question is, and you sort of touched on this, do the Dolphins dumb down the playbook? And again, it's not a reflection of Skylar's intelligence, but do you limit the plays? Do you just pick the best plays that he runs, eliminate the rest, and hope that he does well on those? I asked that question to Frank Smith, the offensive coordinator, on Thursday. He would not answer directly, so that led me to believe that they're going to limit the offense somewhat for Skylar Thompson. Just do what he does well. Obviously, he doesn't have to his accuracy or anything close to it, but he can run the ball more effectively than Tua, has more elusiveness, even though he's not a runner by trade. He's not like Tyler Huntley, who's going to consistently gain yards on runs, but he does have elusiveness in the pocket. The question is, will he get happy feet on Sunday? Because that's been the issue we've seen when he's struggled, where he doesn't stand up in the pocket. He loses some of his footwork. Sure, Darrell Bevel's worked with him on this for the last 2 years. And does he plant and throw, or does he get happy feet and throw off the run, which can lead to some of his inaccuracies? So I would like to see some shots downfield. He completed a bunch of them in training camp. We've seen him complete some in preseason games. So I think you got to give him the chance to throw some. But I agree with you on the point. You can't do anything that will make him lose confidence, at least the things that McDaniel can control. Now, as far as Seattle's pass rush, not the best, but it's not awful. Leonard Williams, obviously a really good player. He had 8 hits on the quarterback in the first 2 weeks of the season, including 1.5 sacks. Maffei's their other great pass rusher. He has a pair of sacks, but he's questionable for the game. I'd like to see how Teron Armstead and Austin Jackson do on Sunday, because Armstead's obviously playing with a rotator cuff injury. He said he's going to play through it. But remember, last Thursday, 8 days ago, he had to leave the game because he couldn't lift his arm over his head. The rotator cuff was that limiting. He's going to wear a sling or a harness in the game. He says that's helping, but he's worth monitoring. And also Austin Jackson, really good guy who came on last year. He's not off to a great start. Allowed 7 pressures last week. Obviously, the Bills have really good edge players. He allowed 7 pressures and a sack. You'd like to see him get back to where he was last season and be a consistently good right tackle. So I think that's going to be big for him. And then as far as any other offensive issues that are on your mind, obviously we talked about receiver. They're going to have to probably bring up Eskridge or Ezukama. I'd like to see Ezukama get a chance. What else offensively are you looking for? How about more from Jonnu Smith? We saw flashes last week after a slow opener. They were able to get him the ball more last week, 6 catches for 53 yards. Do you want to see more Jonnu Smith on Sunday, Isaiah?
Definitely, because I think for young quarterbacks, usually that tight end is their best friend, right? And so, they're usually on those shorter to intermediate routes. So I would love to see Jonnu get more involved. But also before we end, on the offense, I'm going to be looking out on the outside, because I think we're going to have a heck of a matchup between Tariq Woolen and Tyreek, as well as Devin Witherspoon and Jalen Waddle. I think those are going to be like the matchups to watch, because those are, 2 of the best young corners in this league. And then, on the back end, you have Julian Love, right? So you have 3 Pro Bowlers at that defensive back position. So that to me is going to be it's going to be a test for Skylar for sure. And so I'm looking to hopefully these guys will be able to get open and give him big easy targets. But definitely want to see more Jonnu because especially if it's going to be the second or third string linebacker guarding him, I think that's going to be, he might be a difference maker for sure.
Agree. And you raised a great point about Seattle's corners. You wonder, because they have such good ones in Witherspoon and Woolen, will that make them play fewer 2 high safeties? Will they send more guys closer to the line of scrimmage, which could hurt the Dolphins' running game, but potentially create opportunities for Waddle and Hill? You could see Seattle possibly doing that and challenging Skylar Thompson to try to beat him, saying, we're not sure Skylar can beat us. We'd be more concerned about Achane, which, of course, is different from how it usually is when defenses are more afraid of Tua in the deep passing game than they are the Dolphins' running game. There's a familiar name also in the Seattle secondary, Rayshon Jenkins, former Miami Hurricane. He's the other safety who starts alongside Love. Couple other quick notes on the offense. I asked Jonnu Smith this week, are we going to see you carry the ball? We saw it a ton in training camp and preseason. He smiled and he said, I'm here for anything they need. You kind of feel like there's more in the Jonnu Smith package that's up McDaniel's sleeve. Maybe it involved running plays, so that's something to look for. Here's another little nugget. They've used Tanner Connor on exactly 3 offensive plays each of the first 2 weeks. I talked to Tanner this week. I know they're looking for a particular look from defenses where they can capitalize on a player in Tanner Connor who's now got very competent blocking abilities, but the speed of a wide receiver. I think if they get a certain look for Tanner Conner to be targeted. The Dolphins obviously believe he's progressed to the point where he's worth a spot on the 53. They see developable skills there, so that'll be worth noting. And then on the running back front, we mentioned early in the show, Mostert is very likely out on Sunday. Obviously, Achant's going to get the majority of the carries. Jeff Wilson should get some. And then Jalen Wright. So yesterday on Thursday, we asked Eric Studesville, the running back coach, with Jalen Wright's kind of underwhelming numbers in his debut against Buffalo, 5 carries, 4 yards, how much of that was on blocking? How much of that was Jalen Wright not hitting the holes? And Studesville's answer I thought was interesting, Isaiah. He said he is doing everything we have asked him to do. So he basically said he wasn't to blame for the limited yardage. He's an ascending player. I wouldn't be dissuaded by the low numbers in the opener. He's very much aware of the fact that he's going to have to be patient. He knows that Devon Achane was inactive in his first game last year. So Jalen Wright's a mature kid. He's saying all the right things. And with his high per carry average at Tennessee, we know he's going to break through at some point with a long run. We saw it in training camp. We saw it in preseason. Whether it happens Sunday remains to be seen. You still feel good about that running back room even without Mostert, Isaiah?
Oh, of course. I think one of the reasons why Studesville said that was because, and he mentioned it, he had like a 9-yard run called back. Why? I believe it was holding, right? So you can't control that, as a young running back. And obviously, I just, went over, just talked to him briefly, I think a couple days ago. Just was like, how did it feel to be out there? He said it was great. I'm sure he's still hungry. And he was, I asked him, like, how does it feel when, you get a call like that called back? Like, that was, a good little run for you. He's like, I mean, it is what it is. It's the game, right? And so I'm definitely looking for him, hopefully, to have an impact. But if they're riding Devon Achane like they were last week, I don't know how he sees the field, because as we both know, McDaniel loves to ride the hot hand. So yeah, and it's difficult to really establish a rhythm if you're only getting 6 or 7 plays a game, for sure.
Good point. You wonder, can Achane handle that heavy a workload? Again, 29 carries. It's so funny. Tyreek Hill said this week, we're going to ride our 160-pound running back. And he said it in jest and affectionately about Achane. He's actually 188 pounds. Obviously, he's diminutive, to an extent at 5'9". But then Tyreek Hill went on to praise Achane, saying he's just different. And I think with Achane, obviously, people have always underestimated the lower body strength, how strong his hips and legs are. He managed to come out of a 29-touch game in pretty good health despite going in with a sore ankle last week. So I'm really encouraged by what we've seen from him early in the season. Definitely. Even though he had just 10 carries for 24 yards in the opener, he was terrific last week. He's caught 15 passes already. He's lined up at receiver close to 24 times. So he's been as good as any Dolphin player early in the season. Turning to the defense, Isaiah, the run defense was a strength last year. Dolphins allowed only 3.8 per carry, which was top 5 in the league. This year, the run defense is 15th. Some of that skewed a little bit by the James Cook 49-yard run, which Anthony Weaver, the Dolphins defensive coordinator, blamed on miscommunication. If you take that out, the numbers are better. You know that Long and Brooks are good against the run. You know that Sealer and Calais Campbell are. The question is, will they get enough from their other interior players? Benito Jones and Brandon Peely are kind of splitting nose tackle snaps, your 4th and 5th defensive line snaps. Deshaun Hand's been pretty solid. That's one of the bigger questions in my mind. Will you get enough play from the behemoths on your defensive line, your nose tackles, to be effective against the run? Obviously, with Kenneth Walker unlikely to play, it looks like Charbonnet will get the brunt of the work for Seattle. As far as Seattle's passing game, that to me, and we're going to talk about that to me is obviously the huge concern Sunday for Miami, because you're talking about really good receivers with DK Metcalf, who's a Pro Bowler, Tyler Lockett, who was a Pro Bowler many years ago in 2015, Jackson Smith, also part of that group. And Weaver was asked this week, are you going to have Ramsey shadow potentially Metcalf or go from side to side? He didn't want to reveal that, but he has shown a willingness, obviously, to do that Vic Fangio didn't show. What concerns you most, Isaiah, about Seattle's offense in this matchup? Is it Geno Smith? Is it Metcalf and company?
Yeah, definitely the receiving core. I'm going to be looking at Jalen just to see how healthy he is. I think, he looked a little bit rusty in week 1. I can't lie to you. Last week, it wasn't really enough there to really say. I mean, I think what Josh Allen went through 100-something yards, right? So this week is the one for me where you kind of need a takeaway. Anytime, and this is funny because Weaver was asked about, do you guys take more ownership now of this team, considering the situation that they have on the other side of the ball with Skylar at quarterback? And he was like, well, no, we're trying to be the best defense in the league, blah, blah, blah. Again, lip service. But I think at the same time, you can't tell me that they're not looking to make plays on the defensive end, even more so now than they were last week and the week before, because of the disadvantage that they have at quarterback. And I think takeaways are the number one way to do that. Obviously, Javon Holland, his big takeaway week one, you have your eyes on him. But, with those receivers, man, I really want to see, the Miami secondary take over. I honestly, and I think it's possible. Like, they remade the secondary with Poyer, and Kendall Fuller, like two additions in the offseason that were highly touted. Like, games like this are the ones where we want to see that, right? We want to see the names match up to the skill level that we believe that they have, right? And I think that's possible this weekend. I mean, at least it'll be a test. It'll be a big test, and it'll be very clear how they fare and what we can kind of extrapolate that for the rest of the season.
And also rush on Sunday. There was no pressure at all on Josh Allen. Jalen Phillips was very hard on himself after the game. We're seeing Chuck Robinson do some good things as far as pressures. He has 3 of them in 16 pass rushing snaps this year, but he's got to get to the quarterback. And I don't want to rush him on it. It's only 2 games in. You can't form any big picture judgments. His pressure rate is good, just like it was at Penn State. He was top 5 in the country among FBS edge rushers in pressure rate last year. The problem with Penn State is not enough of the pressures were converted to sacks. He had only 2 sacks against Power 5 teams last year, 1 against Iowa, 1 against Rutgers. The other 2 were against UMass. He had 15 tackles at Penn State last year. This year so far, 1 solo tackle, which went for loss to his credit, no sacks. Now, that doesn't mean he's playing poorly. Metric site says he's been really good. They say he's the Dolphins' second best defender so far behind Jordan Brooks, if you believe the Pro Football Focus numbers. But at some point, obviously, you have to see the sack numbers. You need it from somewhere, whether it's from Ogba, whether it's from Phillips, whether it's from Calais Campbell, who obviously had a sack in his first play as a Dolphin. But you're going to need pressure, because even as good as Kendall Fuller and Poyer and Holland and obviously Jalen Ramsey are, you're not going to be able to shut down Metcalf and Lockett without pressure on the quarterback. And they're going against the Seattle line that is injured. George Fant, their starting right tackle, is injured. Charles Cross is their other starter at left tackle. So I think a real key Sunday will be, can he get a pass rush on Geno Smith, who's completing, by the way, 74% of his passes early this season. Comeback player of the year in 2022, been a Pro Bowler each of the last 2 seasons. South Florida kid, real success story to see how he's resuscitated his career and done a very good job for Seattle. Before we go, want to give everyone an update on Tua. He is traveling with the team to Seattle. By all accounts, he's doing well this week. He's been engaged in meetings. He spent a lot of time with Tyler Huntley, telling him nuances of the offense and getting him familiar with the playbook. He's been watching practice, which is good. McDaniel said he's doing some things which cause him to sweat. Now, that doesn't mean he's at a stage 1 of protocol. And for those wondering, the Dolphins are not telling us what stage he's at. They're keeping that confidential. They've also declined to say whether he's had any symptoms, but we got a very good clue about that today in the locker room. I asked Raheem Mostert, how much has he been around Tua? What has he observed? He said that he went with Tua and his family and Jonnu Smith and his family to Disney on Ice less than 24 hours after Tua had the concussion, and he showed no visible signs of being concussed. So that to me is very encouraging, and it means if there were serious symptoms, there's no way Tua would have gone to Disney on Ice a day after having a concussion. Now, people have asked, does that mean that the Dolphins were premature in putting him on injured reserve? The answer is absolutely not. Concussion experts say that if you've had a series of concussions, and even if you haven't, you're more likely to get another one during a short time after having one, and the likelihood of a more severe one also rises significantly. So they've done the right thing putting him on ice for a month. Chris Nowinski, the concussion expert, told me before the Dolphins put him on IR that with his history and with what's known medically about concussions, he needs to sit out at least a month and then come back, presuming his symptoms are gone. So everyone who commented under my tweets saying, well, why'd they put him on IR if he's going to Disney on ice? One thing has nothing to do with the other. The Dolphins, I think, are handling this correctly, and he's certainly allowed to live his life. Were you encouraged by the fact that he's out and about so quickly after the concussion?
Definitely. Because one, it gives credence to I believe it was the Rappaport report that, he doesn't plan to retire. So that's number one, right? He's still engaging with his teammates. Number two, it's encouraging because, look, like this is a guy that is beloved by this franchise, right? It's very clear. I don't know if you've seen this, but in that hallway in between where we are in the media room and the facility, I believe it's the communications office, they have a picture, a portrait. Let me actually be accurate. A portrait of Tua Tagovailoa painted next to Dan Marino. If that doesn't tell you how in high regard that this franchise looks at that man, I don't know what will, right? And so I say all that to say that it's very encouraging to hear the signs. And like, I just, from a personal standpoint, like, it's just good to hear that the guy's okay. Like, bottom line, like, he's had some very scary moments on that field. And, just to hear that he's still engaging with guys, he's still staying active. I believe Armstead said that, he's sweating a little bit, which is great to see. Great to hear, excuse me. It's just good to see that, this guy is healthy somewhat, right? And, I feel like it would, if it was worse, he wouldn't have been doing this. He wouldn't
be standing out in the sun. He wouldn't be going to Disney
standing out
on
in the sun. Because as someone that has had a few concussions in their lifetime, like, the sun is not your friend in the immediate aftermath of a concussion, right? And so just to hear all that stuff, to me, it's a good sign for sure.
Yeah, and we have to be realistic about this. Hopefully, Tua will not have another concussion. It would be terrible if he did, but if he does, I think with his history, based on what science says, what concussion experts have told me, you're not going to see a short time span from the injury to a return with future concussions. You have to be careful with him. He's likely going to be sidelined for weeks as opposed to a week, and we're thinking a month or so with future concussions. Obviously, the severity of the concussion will have an impact on how long he misses. But anyone saying, well, if he has a bunch more concussions and he wants to continue playing, he can come back in a week or two, that's not how it's going to work. So the Dolphins have to be prepared to go extended stretches with actions, which appears to be higher with him than with others, and that's the sad reality of it. But I like the Tyler Huntley pickup, Isaiah. I think it gives them a dimension which they didn't have. A mobile quarterback. At some point, you wonder, will they have a Tyler Huntley package? It might be premature for that because he's still learning the playbook, but he could definitely be a good change of pace guy. And frankly, if Skylar stinks for 2 weeks, Tyler Huntley's probably going to get a chance. We hope that doesn't happen. You hope Skylar, who's a good kid, takes advantage of the opportunity. But Tyler Huntley has a better NFL body of work than Skylar Thompson in the limited body of work for both. Huntley went 3-6 filling in for Lamar Jackson, but he was competent for the most part in those games. 8 TDs, 7 interceptions, ran the offense fairly competently, obviously can run the ball. So he's there if Skylar doesn't deliver. But I do think Skylar's going to get the full game in Seattle. I'd be shocked if he were yanked unless he were just so abysmal that McDaniel had no other choice. But I like the decision bringing Huntley because to me, other than Tannehill, who's being selective about where he goes, he was the best option available. Was there anyone else out there that made your toes tingle at all? Or you think Huntley was the guy?
I think Huntley was the guy, to be honest. I saw the mention of Teddy Bridgewater and Tannehill. For me, I think Teddy Bridgewater is very comfortable coaching Miami Northwestern. Like I've seen him on podcasts. It doesn't look like he's remotely, even interested in coming back, right? Tannehill, I was kind of surprised we didn't hear anything about, the Dolphins reaching out to him just because of the obvious connection, right? But bringing, Huntley home to me was just a good sign. You could tell he was smiling from ear to ear that he was back, So definitely the right move for sure. Plus, he's younger than everyone.
Funny asking this week Huntley about whether he wants to go by Snoop or Tyler. He says His mama calls him Tyler. He says everyone else calls him Snoop. And he said Snoop Dogg, who he met at the Pro Bowl a couple of years ago, calls him Little Snoop. And when he threw 2 touchdown passes at the Pro Bowl as a fill-in for Josh Allen, that Snoop Dogg was giving him a hard time in a very playful, affectionate way, saying, there you go, Little Snoop. So that was one of the funnier moments this week.
Yes,
when we got to spend some time with Tyler Huntley. So I think the Dolphins have handled the quarterback thing well. Putting 2 on IR, I think, was a smart and wise and prudent decision. Just so you take the time missed part out of the equation, just let him heal. And I think Huntley was the best available option. The question is, did they make enough other good decisions in terms of the interior of their offensive line? Do they have enough good defensive tackles, which is another area that you can question the offseason? And also, did they leave themselves vulnerable at wide receiver? I don't blame them for the Beckham pickup because they didn't know necessarily he would be out 4 games.
Yeah.
It can't be blamed with Craycraft's injury, obviously, and he would have been helping had he not been hurt. I guess the one thing from a personnel standpoint, Isaiah, with receiver that I would fault them for would be, there had to be someone better than Grant Dubose when you needed a receiver with one spot you had on your roster. I just don't understand investing in a developmental player when you had him at receiver and you had no one as a third receiver on your roster. And going back to Robbie Chosen again, also inevitably was a mistake and he was let go. So I think you can question him for that. So best of luck, Skylar Thompson in Seattle. He's going to need it in a loud place. Hopefully he gets blocking. Hopefully he gets a strong running game. And we hope it'll be a fun game on Sunday. Omar will be back after reporting for us from Seattle on Sunday. He will join us on Monday for our post-game show. We hope to see you then. We hope you have a great weekend. Thanks for joining us, everybody.
Peace.